All right. And Stephanie.caro, welcome to the Youth Ministry Motion podcast. So glad to have you.
Why, thank you, sir. I am having fun already. It's my favorite thing, drink coffee and talk.
And we're right. Absolutely. I mean, what's better than that? Nothing really. I mean,
we're supposed to say Jesus.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. But can we have Jesus and talk and drink coffee? Can we do three things?
Every day of my life. Every day.
Absolutely. Well, Ms. Stephanie.caro, I want to ask you because people want to know, guests that come on the show, they want to know their backstory, and
Sure.
And youth workers are kind of like superheroes, and every superhero has an origin story, right? Spider-Man is coming out, and his origin story is he was bit by a spider, and therefore, became Spider-Man. And so I guess people want to know, how'd you become a youth worker? Did a spider bite you, or did a teenager bite you?
Yes. Finally, the story comes out. Well, first of all, my dad was in ministry. My dad was a pastor, and he moved on to another church, and my husband and I were still there at the church. And, we were young newlyweds. And back in that day, if you could breathe, you must have been okay as a youth worker, because this was in the 19 Never You Minds.
Correct.
Like 40 years ago. Yes. And so there was no such thing as staff youth workers, and I'll tell you what, really though, Paul, there was no such thing as women youth directors, period. I know, right? What? And so my dad had moved on from the church, and they needed somebody to kind of step in and volunteer. And so my husband and I stepped in and said, okay, we'll be the youth directors, but it really wasn't my husband's jam. And so so I just kind of started, I didn't know what I was doing, but I started by teaching a confirmation class and taking kids on a district youth trip, and found out that you weren't supposed to put the kids to bed and then leave the ski trip with the other adults and go play pool. You weren't supposed to do that. Don't do that, people. That was back before Safe Sanctuary. And so 40 years ago, oh my gosh, yeah, it's been like 40 years.
Wow.
I know.
That's an incredible journey.
Which I only look like 40.
Clearly, if you're watching via the YouTube, you can clearly see that Ms. Caro is amazing.
It's amazing. It's
in all her glory. That's right. So we have you today to talk about, and we're going to talk to, senior pastors here in just a minute. So if you're a senior pastor, you need to hang on. You need to hang in there with us. But we're going to talk to them, but we're going to talk about, how to keep a thriving youth worker at your church. But can you tell the audience what a thriving youth worker looks like? Does it mean having a large youth ministry? Does it mean having all that charisma that just draws teenagers to you like a magnet? Is that a thriving youth worker? Is that the textbook definition?
No, I'm so glad you asked, because it used to be back then, back in the day when I first got started, I think every church was looking for that kind of sort of hippie, played guitar, maybe had a beard, sort of looked like Jesus 20 something that could also play basketball and walk on water and lead music and all this kind of thing. And so, I think not anymore. Churches have gotten so smart. They realize that a thriving youth worker is one that has great systems, great organization, some healthy boundaries about themselves, that is satisfied with having 6 kids or 60 kids. Paul, the average size youth group in America is only like 7 or 8 kids. There's only like 7 or 8. That's the average number at churches in America. And so, I think it's the healthy youth worker just wants to do good youth ministry regardless of the number.
Yeah, and I know that there's a lot of youth workers that just breathe a sigh of relief that the average number is 7 or 8, because there's maybe some youth workers listening and watching and saying, hey, I have 7 or 8 kids. I'm not terrible.
Average.
I'm average. That's right.
Yes. I'm mediocre. I mean, I'm
well,
Yeah.
yes, for the time being, and but it'll get there, but you're not below the national average.
Right. And you know what? But at the same time, when I teach workshops to small churches, which is kind of my niche area, is small church youth ministry.
Mm-hmm.
I will charge them with this. Even if you have 2 kids show up, do the thing with excellence. Don't ever say, where is everybody? Don't ever say just 2 showed up. Because if you ever want to build any credibility or any consistency, you can't let 2 kids know it wasn't worth doing just for 2 kids.
That's right.
Because 2 kids, 1 kid, it's absolutely worth doing it. And you just go out there and you do the best you can with who you've got, and really let God do the rest as well. So
absolutely. And I've taken many a kid on a failed event where I said, well, this isn't going to happen. Let's go to McDonald's. Let's go do something, else that doesn't require 20 kids to go.
sure.
Or we just went and did the thing, whatever the thing was, whether it was laser tag or whatever it was. Well, we're going anyway. And, I'll eat it in the budget,
Right. Sure. I've made that mistake too. In fact, I'll teach that in my workshops. If your budget is so tight, then if you're a smaller church, don't plan anything that requires a certain critical mass to have. If it's going to cause your budget I learned that the hard way, taking kids to Wet and Wild water park and thinking of, sure, I'd have 15 kids there, and I didn't, and didn't have enough. I thought it was going to be the group rate. Anyway, I learned my lesson.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a lot of youth workers shaking their heads now. They're either went over budget or something happened and it just did not work out, and then you have to explain things to people.
I want to say to all of you out there that are listening, I hope that you don't even hear the fact that there is the plumber in the bathroom right across from my office door and putting in a new toilet. Of all the times that we're gonna jackhammer and drill stuff, it's gonna happen now, which caused both dogs to go ballistic because apparently our home's under attack.
Yeah.
So now, and I'm just sitting here talking with Paul, and you're wondering what's that noise, and it's kind of like youth ministry. You just keep plowing ahead.
That's right. It's not right. It's not youth ministry if things are going perfectly smooth. And it's not really a Zoom call unless you have dogs, babies, or something going on in the background.
Deliveries.
Yes, Amazon deliveries.
Dogs. Yep. Or you've got the plumber installing in a new toilet at this particular moment. Thank you very much.
That's right. And as we move, as we transition to going into talking about senior pastors, lead pastors, I think it's important that we talk about the fact that what role or responsibility does the senior or lead pastor have in helping a youth worker become a thriving youth worker? Because I think there's a lot of pastors who want their youth pastors to know everything when they get in there. They want them thriving the minute they walk through the door. And they want numbers to jump up by 50% simply by the entrance of the youth worker into their facility. And I just think it's important. What is the role or responsibility of lead pastor to facilitate or to help or to mentor a youth worker to becoming a thriving youth worker?
I think first and foremost, what I've seen is what I see missing more often than not is the average youth worker comes in and and they want to do great things and they want to make the ministry better. And what's missing is I find a lot of the foundational stuff for providing a thriving, healthy work environment. Like the youth worker comes in and there's a job description that was written like 15 years ago, and there's no set system for evaluation, periodic check-in. And I know everybody's heart goes a little bit thumpy when you have to think about your yearly evaluation. You know what? I don't think it should be yearly. I think there ought to be some kind of evaluative system, gosh, every quarter, where not only is the youth worker getting to check in and be checked on, but maybe also going both ways. One of the things that always bothered me in youth ministry was I think most youth workers were a little bit like puppies. You have to tell us we did something wrong right when we did it. Don't tell me a year later that Mrs. So-and-so was mad at me for playing skip-bo with the youth group and we didn't play Uno or something. Don't tell me a year
Uno is holier than skip-bo, I can tell you right now.
And so, I just remember sitting there thinking, I don't even remember the instance because it was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 months ago. And now you want me to defend myself. So I think a couple of things the senior pastor can do is make sure that there is a system for expression both ways. What's working, what's not working. What do you need? What are you not getting? So that the youth worker gets to help create some clearly communicated expectations. And that includes numbers. One of the things, I'm senior consultant with Ministry Architects. I work for this guy named Mark DeVries. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the guy.
He's pretty legendary.
He's he's legendary. All right. And one of the things we always encourage pastors to do with their staff people is set target expectations. Don't make a youth worker have some session member that thinks you should have 100 kids and another council member think you ought to have 50 kids and somebody expecting this. And then you've got 20 kids coming and you think it's all going great. So I think thriving youth workers, senior pastors help have two-way evaluation, also help your youth workers set clear expectations, not grow the church by 50 youth when you've been having 6 kids come. Yep. That's expecting. What is unfair and doesn't help a youth worker thrive is expecting the youth ministry to save the church. First of all, only Jesus saves. Secondly, the church leadership has to be willing to boldly go where no one else has gone, not expect the youth ministry to pull everyone up. I think for thriving youth workers, and we all know this, I just still see so many bad examples of it. We don't help youth workers set realistic work schedules. I actually do think it is actually, some of you may not like this idea, but I do think we should have some kind of timekeeping system for youth workers to use. They don't have to be at the office, yeah, but they should probably clock in, clock out, or time schedule. That way, there's no imagine, what does that youth worker do all the time? The youth worker can say, here's where I was at Starbucks here, I was at the school here, in, out, total hours. And that helps the youth worker thrive because nobody's out there pointing a finger at the youth worker saying, well, what are we paying you for? You're never here.
Yeah. I remember I used to fill out a weekly planner type sheet, and I would hand that in. So they would know kind of what my week was, what did I have planned? And I think that's critical to let your pastor know. It's critical for you to have a plan, first of all, I think, as a youth worker. And then it's also, like you said, to spread that information around a little bit so people know what you're doing when you're visiting schools, when you're doing a hospital visit, when you're taking kids out to eat. And you bring up so many great points there that I hope that those that are listening and watching, this is something that if you don't have a review system in place, why not take this as suggestions that you could bring up and interject into whatever you have right now. Maybe nothing. There may be no review system.
Mhm.
You're just kind of out there and you don't know if you're doing any good or not. No, you're getting no feedback. And
Mhm.
so you can take this as an idea, as Stephanie said, which I think is a great idea, is simply go ahead and, at best or at worst, you send your pastor an email occasionally and tell them what you're doing. Let them know your
Yes.
schedule or something like
Yes.
that. Just include them in your emails with your staff, with your volunteers or whatever you're doing, and just put them on the list so that they kind of know what they're doing. Which then brings me then, if all this is done, you've probably seen it, maybe more so even than I, but the church is losing a lot of good youth workers. They're losing thriving youth workers.
Mhm.
Why is that? Why is the church? I see it two ways. Number one, I think, and there's two sides to every story. So when you hear about the terrible things that are done in the church and the pastor fires a youth worker, fires a youth pastor, right? You're hearing one side of a story. You're not hearing the whole thing. But then you have the other side where that youth workers are just collapsing under the weight or the pressure or the stress. And of course, COVID and all that. But I would say that before COVID happened, churches were losing
Mhm.
valuable, thriving youth workers. So if we were to reverse engineer that, then why are they losing thriving youth pastors and what can they do to prevent it?
Well, you are right that the pandemic did not help. And youth workers, even senior pastor types, lead pastors, are also part of that great resignation you hear everyone talking about. A number of youth workers really, really struggled during the pandemic because all of a sudden they couldn't use their normal bag of tricks in youth ministry because they didn't see their kids. And
Yep.
it became the level of depression for many youth pastors became really high, and so we lost a lot. I'll give you an example. Our search department, ministry architects, we've never been busier. We have
Wow.
doing so many searches. We're at the highest level of current searches we've ever been. um, Churches that the youth worker just couldn't make it through the pandemic, churches that maybe had to back away from staff finances because of loss of income during the pandemic. But to really go before that, like you said, and deconstruct it all, we often set the youth worker too often in a church up for failure because we don't hire well from the beginning. A church will say, we just need to hire some young person to come on in and do youth ministry and take our kid and, be a Pied Piper. And then parents or adults aren't happy with their performance because maybe that youth worker doesn't know yet great communication skills or great organizational skills. And
Right.
so, whereas the teenagers all love that youth worker, the adults get just exasperated with them. And they come, they last couple few years, and people get upset with them and they're out the door. And then the church is like, well, we wanted that youth worker to grow this church, like I mentioned before,
Yeah. Yeah.
save our dying congregation. So I think we're losing youth workers because we hire poorly from the beginning, or we hire well, but then we don't give them the tools they need to become more professional at what they do.
Well, unpack that because I think that's a fascinating observation because I don't know, and I can talk from experience. I worked for pastors that were ill-equipped to equip others. They just
Yeah,
were. And
right.
so what are some of those tools you would recommend And I think youth pastors can hear this, because if they're not getting what they need from their pastors, maybe they can sense that this toolbox maybe is something they could say, hey, this is what I'm looking for. So what are some of those tools that
So,
pastors can use?
oh, that's such a good question. Pastors and youth pastors. Here is the not so sexy part of youth ministry. The fun part is the glow in the dark, midnight Quidditch, capture the flag, overnight game, right?
Yes,
That's the
yes.
part we all love. Every youth worker just loves those cool things.
Yeah.
But you know what will really ultimately save you to be a better youth worker are those foundational things. And so here's something, any of you that have read Sustainable Youth Ministry, you've read Mark's dance floor illustration. If you want to hire well and then have a youth worker that thrives, make sure the dance floor is solid. And what we mean by that is make sure, because you can't do new fancy dances if the dance floor is cracked, is what Mark says. And so a solid dance floor means you have a great data management tracking system. And okay, and you're Paul, Paul might say, well, I only got 6 kids. I can remember that. Really? Tell me last week's sermon title. Tell me the sermon title from 2 weeks ago. You can't remember what kids were there all the time. So you need a good tracking system, even if it's just an Excel spreadsheet. You need to have great game plans for things. You need to have program planning sheets. You need to have good major event notebooks. You need to have good volunteer helps. All of that system stuff, which seems not quite so exciting, will make that solid dance floor. And then you don't have parents or church members or church leaders biting at your tail all the time because you didn't do good communication about an event. That really is helping them. Now, maybe the pastor can help you figure out those systems, or maybe the pastor helps you get a good coach that can figure out those systems. But you put those in place, you're going to find yourself enjoying your job so much more, even if you're not the organized type. But I bet you have some mom is just dying to get your office all organized and all Excel spreadsheetized.
Or just to snoop through it.
Or just to snoop through it and figure out what are all those Lego pieces doing all
That's
over.
right.
And so that's one way that you help them thrive is expect and help them get solid systems.
Yeah, and 100% agree. That's the, whether that solid dance floor is, you got to have that. If you're, let's say you're going to do something outrageous in youth, not that you would in youth ministry, but if you did something outrageous,
we would.
but you wouldn't be doing it on a rickety dance floor.
No.
In other words, that the scope of the risky thing you're going to do is equal to, or should be equal to, the stability of the dance floor. That if your dance floor is okay, then the risk might be okay too, because you have built in, you've solidified that dance floor to make those moves on it that you want to move.
That's right. I think another piece for pastors to hear.
Yes.
And in each denomination, the system is a little bit different. In my faith tradition, we have a personnel type committee called staff parish. And staff parish is the laity team that manages over staffing issues. And so whether you have an HR team or a personnel committee or a staff parish, or however you handle that, I want to encourage pastors to encourage those teams, make those teams two-way streets, not just the place that a youth worker gets called to when they're in trouble.
Yeah.
Don't make that personnel committee always bad cop. Let there be some times where it's a good cop thing, where, in my faith tradition, we call it staff parish relations. And
Mhm.
it's supposed to, in theory, be staff and laity in the church have back and forth communication and relationships. Well, it doesn't usually work that way. It's usually this committee is the one that hires you and then fires you, yet none of them know a single thing about what it takes to be a youth worker, because none of them are youth workers.
Yeah.
And so I think equipping those personnel committees at what's happening in youth ministry helps the youth worker thrive, letting them know, for an example, that this is a difficult time for many youth workers around the country.
They are. Yeah.
This fall, attendance for youth ministries is averaging around 33% down due to COVID, and post-pandemic. Anywhere between 33 to 40% is the rising average. And so it's not the time to put the pressure on a youth worker to grow right now. For the rest of this school year, I think success for a youth worker is keeping the kids we have.
Yes.
And so personnel committees, probably keeping them educated as to what's happening in the youth ministry world, helps the youth worker thrive.
Yeah. Time to circle the wagons,
It
as they
is kind of,
say.
yeah.
And look, take care of what's in your house. Take care
True.
of
Right.
take care of what's in your house right now. There'll be
Make
time
sure.
to do major outreaches, all the things.
Exactly.
Take care of what's in your house. I think that's
Mhm.
such a great observation, Stephanie. But as we begin to wrap up our time, can you offer, there are, like, you've already offered so many tips and so many ideas of what youth workers can move now to, because some feel like they're not thriving. They just don't feel like, because it's either number based or it's just performance based or whatever it is. How can they start to shift from wherever they're at, wherever they're thinking about in their ministry, to a thriving mentality? So where can they start to shift and do, even beyond we've mentioned a lot of the X's and O's of thriving, right? Having a good administration, good bones, good dance floor, all the things in there. But where can they start to shift, either on a mental or an emotional level, into a thriving? How can they start to change their perspective, maybe, to be able to move
It's,
them into that?
this is a great time of year to think about that too. I am not a big one for making New Year's resolutions. Having said that, I always found in youth ministry that this was a good time of year to kick off some new habits, because for a lot of youth groups out there, we've already had the second, third Sunday of Advent. So we've all had our youth Christmas party. Everybody's had their youth Christmas party. And that is a signal that you don't have to have youth anymore till after Epiphany.
That's right.
Right. And if you are having youth, you shouldn't be. You deserve a break.
That's
And
right.
so we've all got 2 or 3 weeks, 3 or 4 maybe off, that you celebrate the holidays with your family. And then I think it's a good chance for you just to spend some, what Mark calls balcony time. Balcony time is that time where you're not doing ministry, but you're looking down over it and you're kind of figuring out strategy for yourself. And instead of strategy for the ministry, what if this or the season you figured out strategy for you? And I want to let you off the hook. At first, I was thinking do 3 new things. And then I thought, no, let's do 2 new things. Maybe in the first of the year, if I were going to pick here's what I choose from, and you choose from this list. 2 things. Find a coach or mentor that helped you with systems, if that's what you need. If you don't have a good evaluation system, why don't you just write your own eval and send it to your pastor? Start it that way. Hey,
Yeah.
create it on Google form. Go rate me from 1 to 5, and then give them like 6 or 7 things to rate you on. I'll tell you what, that'll make a good impression. The fact that you're willing to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly, so to speak. So
Yeah.
first, maybe find a coach or a mentor. 2, maybe set up your own evaluation form. 3, if you have people saying all the time, what does that youth worker do all day? Then put there's apps for everything. Find an app where you're tracking yourself.
Yeah.
And then 4 choices. I'm not saying you do all 4 of these,
Right.
just pick 2. 4, find that person in your church that actually does love doing organizational things. They're probably the engineer type. They're the ones that know how to do all of those Excel spreadsheet formula, geeky nerd things. And have them help you get organized. They would love to do that. And so I'd say pick 2 of those things and put them into place. I am going to be generous and give you to the end of January.
That is super generous of you.
I know, because
Stephanie.
I was thinking January 15th.
Ooh, okay.
But now I decided January 31st. And if you need help with this, and I don't even know when this is going to play, but hopefully it's going to play so that folks are listening to this in time. But if you need help, just email me at Ministry Architects and I'll go over these. Hopefully I'll remember what I just said, and I'll be happy to go over these with you.
Well, if you have taken notes, listeners and viewers, and I hope you have, that you're going to remember these things, and you're going to send Stephanie an email and say, hey, Stephanie, this is the things I have chosen to do, and I'm going to encourage you to do that. I'm going to encourage you to go ahead and write out one of those things or 2 of those things.
I'll acquiesce to that, 1 or 2, because one of them may be a big deal for you.
It could be. And so I'm going to encourage you, if you're watching, if you're listening, send that and say, Miss Stephanie, I have done it. This is what I have done. This is what I'm working on. And then she will get back to you, and she will probably send you a note of encouragement, a box of steaks, maybe.
Maybe a cute meme of a fluffy cat.
Ooh, I like that.
Who doesn't like cat things?
That if I certainly do. And if you're watching and listening and do not like fluffy cat things, I can't help you.
Yes.
You're beyond my help.
If they don't like fluffy cat things, I don't even know if they're American. Come on.
Well, and to all our friends who are listening and watching that are not American, that's okay too. If you don't like fluffy things,
you Canadians,
you are. That's right. You're as not as nice of a Canadian as you think you are.
See, that's the thing. The Canadians would say they love fluffy cat things because they're just super polite.
But they would, even if they hated them, they would say, I like them.
They would say, yeah, you betcha.
You betcha. You betcha. And on that note, Miss Stephanie.caro, let people know where they can reach out to you. They have your email there at Ministry Architects. Where else can they reach out to you?
Oh, on Friday nights, I'm down. Never mind.
Ooh, what?
Well, really, the best way is at Stephanie.caro at ministryarchitects.com.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't know how to spell that, just go to the Ministry Architects page and look on the team page, and I'll be way down at the end because we organized it alphabetically by first name and not.
And she is not bitter about that at all.
I am not bitter at all. So I'm way down at the end. Just seriously, if you reach out to me, I will answer you because I like talking to people. So
clearly we know that if you've been listening and watching today, Stephanie loves to talk to people. So
I know. Yeah.
I'm going to put a link to all her stuff in the show notes and down in the doobly-doo. That's YouTube terms for the description box.
Is that a real thing?
Doobly-doo. Yeah, it's called the doobly-doo by some people. So it's the doobly-doo. Information down the doobly-doo,
That
YouTubers.
sounds like a word I'm not supposed to say.
Or it's a word you use to replace another word.
Exactly.
Could be. It could be. But we appreciate your time today, Miss Stephanie. Thank you so much for encouraging people. Thanks for talking to pastors. If you're a pastor, you need to go ahead and reach out as well, because you need to know some things about your youth
Yeah.
ministry that maybe you don't know, and Miss Stephanie can answer for you.
I'll tell
And
you everything you should know.
she will school you hard. I'm telling you
Hard.
what, you're going to
Mama
class.
Caro. Mama Caro is in the house.
Mother Caro. And if you don't learn, you get a slap with the ruler on the knuckles.
No, I just point the finger.
Oh,
This little my forefinger. For those of you that can't see me, it's my pointer finger.
right. You get one of those.
Yeah, yeah.
You, Stephanie.caro, are a delight. Thank you for being on the show today.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you.